The bells, well, they're ringing, but I'm not talking about the ring bell. I'm talking all about the jingle bells on this very special edition of Fight in Focus right here on Fight. These, my friends, are the 12 days of Fight Plus. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm John Alba, and I'm joined by a very, very special co-host. He is the host of Insight with Chris Van Vliet and one of the largest YouTube channels for anyone interviewing in the combat sports and entertainment space out there. He is Mr. Chris Van Vliet. Chris, how you doing? I'm so excited to have you part of the 12 days of Fight Plus here.
I am so honored that you asked me to join you for this. And my friend, it is like looking in a mirror right now. This is incredible.
Listen, this is like a running thing where if Chris and I are going to events, shows, whatever it may be, someone will call me Chris Van Vliet. Like that is, and I feel sorry for that. I'm sorry.
What an insult.
I
Wow.
know, right? like what an insult. No, listen, it is a real pleasure to be able to get a chance to actually work on this project with you because we're celebrating 12 days of Fight Plus. Fight has done such an incredible job, Chris, at thinking outside the box, reinventing what content can be. And now we find ourselves looking back at some of the best content in the last 2 years here.
Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine to be here with you, John. And I know this probably isn't the first time that people watching this have heard of Fight Plus. In fact, Fight Plus has been taking up all the headlines recently with the addition of GCW events to the platform. And now a gift from us to you as we present you with 12 days of Fight Plus special events for all of you on the nice list this year.
And look, even if you end up on the naughty list too, it's okay.
You could still watch.
You could still watch because over the next hour, Chris and I are going to take a look at 12 premium events that you can find streaming exclusively through Fight Plus and catch up on this holiday season. Now, if you're not familiar with Fight Plus, here's what we're talking about. More than 1,000 hours of live action every single year with an archive of more than 4,000 hours of content across 200 plus organizations and promotions. And the very best part about it, Chris, just $4.99 a month or annually, just about $50, $49.99. And you can even start with a 7-day free trial. This is unparalleled access to that amount of content.
$4.99 a month is an absolute steal. So for any combat sports fan on your Christmas list this year, I mean, this makes for a pretty incredible gift.
$4.99. Think about that. How many times do you step out of your house, you step out of your apartment, you go down to your local coffee shop, you drop more on that on one cup of coffee.
That is true.
Than what you'd have for a month's worth of Fight Plus content. And as I said, over this next hour, we're going to take a look at some of the content that you can catch up on and binge watch here as we present the 12 days of Fight Plus.
And before we take a look at the 12 days of Fight Plus, I think it's important to take a look, John, at how we even got here. And what many people may not know is that Fight Plus was conceptualized right as everything in the world was changing forever.
Yeah, Chris, Fight Plus launched just after the turn of the calendar in 2020, a year that we all know would alter life as we knew it. We actually had a chance to sit down and chat with Fight Chief Operating Officer Michael Weber. And as he shares with us, the Fight team had to pivot pretty quickly in March of 2020 as COVID-19 reshaped the world around us.
So Fight was doing quite well in early 2020. We were just continually growing, doing 20, 30, 35 live shows a weekend. We were in the midst of preparing for WrestleMania weekend, which looked like to have about 30 or 40 different live shows from Tampa, Florida in April there. So things were doing well. We're excited about how things were growing, consistent, stable, continue to get good events from all the big boxing groups, pro wrestling groups, and so forth. And then March 2020 happened. That's when we came up with Fight Plus. In addition to people's entertainment going away, people's jobs are going away at the same time. And there's a lot of uncertainties there about the financial situation, personally. Could you afford that $25 pay-per-view event? Well, it was a lot easier to pay $4.99 for a whole suite of different types of programs. Some of the programming we put together during that time period was interesting, different, and good stories. Probably my favorite one I share with a lot of people during that time period. We had already started communication with a company called OWE, Oriental Wrestling Entertainment. And they, like everybody else all around the world, they're trying to do the pandemic pivot as well. And so what they did is, I think one of the owners owned a bar or nightclub in Cambodia. And so 3 days a week at 11 o'clock New York time in the morning, we did live from Cambodia, OWE Wrestling. You're going to see the 12 Days of FITE Plus. It features a lot of different types of programming. Most of them do not relate to each other, going from rooftop wrestling to motorcycle racing to some of the biggest boxing events ever out there, and of course some pro wrestling. So it's very diverse because we have a very diverse audience. We have a very much a worldwide audience. We think all our product appeals to the whole world, and we think this would be a great way to spend your holidays. And this is our contribution to give you another option in your viewing plans and entertainment plans, and to relax during the holidays coming up here in 2022.
It's almost harrowing to hear about those beginning days of the pandemic, Chris. It's this time period of our lives where I feel like we've almost subconsciously buried so much of it, but there was good stuff going on out there, and especially with Fight Plus kind of finding its own and deciding what can be a sport. How can we present something different that is not just captivating but entertaining as well? And you heard there talking about OWE, talking about World Team Tennis, and there were so many other things that we're going to get into over the course of this program, but people were just craving something as they were locked up at home.
Well, the amazing thing is the world just came to a screeching halt in March 2020, and everyone was doing the exact same thing. They were on their phones or they were watching TV, and they were just craving content. And it was so interesting being able to see Fight pivot and give people exactly what they wanted during that time.
And I think when you find yourself backed against the wall, you have to almost think outside the box. Like, I feel like, I mean, you're a pretty intellectual guy. You're a pretty intellectual thinker.
Wow, that is very kind of you to say.
Well, I mean, listen, I've listened to your podcasts, and I know that when you are pushed against that wall and you have to come up with something different, there are so many challenges that go into what is something that people would enjoy consuming, and how do we do that within the parameters that we're given. For some people, that may be financial resources. For other people, there may be other extenuating circumstances. But in this case, the world was rapidly changing around us, and they had to pivot in a time where I'm not sure that everybody found success in doing so.
And I think that everybody was looking for an escape from what was going on in the world and how unsure everything was at that time, when things were changing day to day, sometimes hour to hour and minute to minute. And to have some sort of escape from what was going on in your everyday life, I think is where Fight really, really excelled here.
Well, thankfully, Chris, Fight and Fight Plus had all those fans who craved something to watch covered during the last couple of years. And I don't think that's better showcased, quite frankly, than our gift on the first day of Fight Plus festivities, a bout that had everybody's attention.
There's a pretty good chance that if you're watching this, or if you've ever heard of YouTube before, you know who Jake Paul is. I mean, he's never one to hold back on his words. At this point, he had had just 2 boxing matches in his pocket before headlining against UFC legend Paul-Askren as part of the first event in the Triller Fight Club series.
I know my ability. I'm just going to prove it to the world.
That show went down April 17th, 2021 at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta in front of a limited capacity crowd. There was just approximately 100 people there. The card featured 6 bouts, one of which even included 2-time heavyweight champion Frank Mir as well. It's estimated that more than 3 million people in total watched this show. That's because it was a hybrid of sports and entertainment kind of mashed together here, with several musical performances, even commentary. Remember this, from the likes of Snoop Dogg and Pete Davidson. The main event saw the problem child Jake Paul shut up the doubters as he was dominant against the debuting Paul-Askren. Even with that small crowd there, it was evident that there would be big things ahead for the YouTube star turned boxing sensation. That win there by Jake Paul over Paul-Askren was really the beginning of what we're seeing with Jake Paul right now in his boxing career. But I hate to say it, John. I know that Jake Paul was going to win that fight anyway, but kind of feels to me like they stopped that just a little bit too early.
Yeah, that first round stoppage there, it left a lot to be desired, I think, but also it did somewhat play into the lore of what Jake Paul was building up. And I think a lot of people, when they first saw him, thought that this was all just a joke. This is just a gag.
Mm-hmm.
But he has undoubtedly, in the time since, including this fight, he has shown that this is a primetime player. This is a guy who rises to the occasion when the lights go on and you have this worldwide audience. Like I said, maybe only 100 people there in person in this gigantic stadium. But this is a premium event that he showed up and showed out in. And when you combine all those other elements, the musical acts, Justin Bieber's there, Doja Cat's there, you get Snoop on commentary, as you were saying, man, if you perform on the biggest stage like that, you're proving that you belong.
Well, here's the thing about Jake Paul. Whether you love him or you hate him, he makes you feel something, and you tune into his fights to either see him win or to see him lose. And I think that that's what's so exciting about every single time Jake Paul steps into the ring.
And there was something you said there during those clips. Estimated 3 million people in total watched this.
Yeah.
You can get access to an event that 3 million people watched right here on Fight Plus for the easy price of just $4.99 a month or $49.99 for the year.
Why not dive in with a 7-day free trial?
You could do that as well. Get a feel for it. See how things are looking. I promise you they're going to look pretty good. And you can get this event. It was one of the most talked about fights of the last several years. Get access to it now with Fight Plus. And the beauty of this 12 Days of Fight Plus celebration is that these events take place all over the world, not just here in the United States where you and I are recording this, because for the second day of the 12 Days of Fight Plus, Chris, we're taking it to Japan. Now, Pro Wrestling Noah is an institution in the world of the square circle. And back on February 12th, 2021, Noah made its way back to an iconic venue. And you can see it all on Fight Plus. The AGEMA Pro Wrestling Noah Destination 2021 return to Budokan Hall show saw Noah run Budokan Hall for the first time in more than a decade. A little more than 4,000 fans were allowed to be in attendance for this one due to the COVID restrictions in Japan at the time, but thankfully it was streamed around the world right here on Fight. And while you may say to yourself, a legendary promotion returning to a legendary venue with 4 championship matches on a card is a great gift as is, well, it was the main event that was the true attraction of the show. That, of course, saw Keiji Muto, also known as the Great Muta, make his return to Noah and challenge Go Shiozaki for the GHC Heavyweight Championship, all in an effort to become the first man ever to hold a world title for New Japan, All Japan, and Noah. And the near 30-minute match, well, didn't disappoint.
The challenger's given it everything. Didn't have enough left in the tank for the moonsault in that moment.
Gearing up for another power move. Oh! He slips at the last moment. But he capitalizes on the position. Chest to chest. 2. No. Still no 3 count.
I'm going to be real with you, Chris. It is very much on my bucket list to attend a Japanese wrestling event in person. And if it happened to be at Budokan Hall, that would be pretty much as prime as you can get as far as that experience. But with Fight Plus, you get access to an event like this where it takes you right there in the element. This year in pro wrestling has been insane. And like, we're going to talk more about that over the course of this conversation, including momentarily here. But the fact that we now live in an environment where we can have crossover between promotions, between continents. It blows my mind, quite frankly, where for so long it seemed like something like this would never happen. But now it can. And I do think with streaming, and particularly with Fight Plus here, getting people access to these events that promote the growth and crossover of the industry, it's so healthy for everybody.
The forbidden door is very, very much open. And I love that we can see that on Fight Plus. And I mean, we're going to talk a lot about wrestling here, but over here in the US, there's no question Game Changer Wrestling was one of the most newsworthy promotions of all of 2022. And GCW made its presence known in a big way in January, as on the third day of Fight Plus, we're gifting you the world on GCW from the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City. Based on the atmosphere that night, you may have thought you were transported back to an ECW show in 1999. Instead, it was GCW that packed the ballroom in its Hammerstein debut with its biggest and one of the most rabid crowds we had seen all year in pro wrestling. This show had something on it for everyone. A 7-man grab for the brass ring ladder match, Matt Cardona against Joey Janela in one of the wildest and wackiest matches of 2022. We had Ruby Soho versus Ali Catch, and even Jeff Jarrett versus Effie. But the two headlining matches featured then GCW champion Jon Moxley defend in a brutal match against Homicide, followed by one of the loudest reactions of the year that saw Nick Gage team with Matt Tremont against the Briscoes for the GCW Tag Team Championship.
At the Hammerstein!
John, how loud was that crowd there in Hammerstein? That is unbelievable. And GCW just keeps impressing with every single show that they have.
Very much so. And for them to pack that building, this historic wrestling venue in its own right that harkens back to those rabid days of wrestling fandom from the 90s, it was a really, really special night. And also, we're talking about the pandemic era here. This was one of those first shows that we saw a fully packed crowd for, as things got a little dicey at the end of 2021 with COVID, and we finally were able to get everyone congregated once again in New York City, a crowd that just was bloodthirsty for great pro wrestling, and they got it with this show.
Shows like this that really make you realize how important live fans are at a wrestling show.
Yeah, and then when you can take that energy and harness it, and put it on pay-per-view, stream it right here on Fight Plus, that is the essence of what makes watching that shared experience that is a pro wrestling show so great. And the beauty of GCW, in particular with Fight Plus, is that we found out this fall that more than 75 GCW events will be available exclusively on Fight Plus just for the price of $4.99 a month or $49.99 for the year. All that access.
5 shows. That's insane.
All that access, Chris, just for that one low price. GCW is going to have a big 2023. It is already cementing itself as one of the premier promotions in all the United States because they've got something for everyone. We talk about that, right? Like, pro wrestling is at its best when it's kind of like that buffet. If you want the steak, you go get the steak. If you want the chicken, you go get the chicken. If you're a vegetarian, you got the veggie dish. There's something for everybody, isn't there?
There is something on a GCW show, no matter what kind of a wrestling fan you are, from start to finish. And the great thing is, if you can't be there in the Hammerstein Ballroom like this event, you can watch it live or on Fight Plus, and it feels like you're right there.
See, I think you and I would preferred that anyway, because I think our hair would have gotten messed up in those rabid crowds. I don't think that would have served us very well.
That's
so I was happy to watch.
Yeah.
I was happy to watch from the comfort of my own home, needless to say. Now, an event that you and I were both in attendance for this year, Chris, was StarCast 5 right here on Fight. And that weekend got started in a blistering way, shall we say? That weekend in July, as we know, it saw Ric Flair's last match, and we're going to talk about that later on in this program. But the festivities all began with the roast of Ric Flair, and it truly was a night best described as no holds barred. This night was a who's who of pro wrestling, as thousands gathered to see the Nature Boy get torched by comedians, Hollywood stars, and wrestling legends alike. WWE Hall of Famers such as Torrie Wilson, Diamond Dallas Page, Eric Bischoff, and Bully Ray were all part of the festivities, with Bully even getting a little sincere and sentimental for a moment to make sure Rick knew how important that he was to him and how much in debt the wrestling industry was to Rick. The night also saw several video cameos and tributes from pop culture and wrestling stars all around the world, including Rob Gronkowski, Chevy Chase, Dolph Ziggler, and even the great one himself, The Rock.
There are very few human beings in our wonderful world, our incredible world, our business that's in our blood and our bones, our passion, our pro wrestling business. There's a few human beings who are responsible for shifting professional wrestling, for shifting the business, for creating a new paradigm in the business. And there is maybe a handful, I would say maybe 4, maybe 5. I'm not one of them. You are one of them. And I want to say congratulations, my friend, on such an incredible career.
All right, Chris, I know The Rock is like your boy.
My
How
guy.
many times have you interviewed him?
I mean, 10 times, not that I'm counting or anything.
Okay, of course. I know that if this was the roast of Chris Van Vliet, we could just shoot a text off and easily get The Rock appearing for that. But in all sincerity, the amount of star power on this event was truly insane. And I was part of the organization of all this stuff, and I didn't even think it would be possible to achieve that level of not just hilarity, but also the sentimentality that was expressed towards Rick on that night.
I think the really interesting thing about this night is you really didn't know what was going to happen next. And there were funny moments, like you said, there were some more emotional moments, but it really came down to like, okay, who are we going to see next? And what are they going to say? Like, are they going to say funny things? Are we going to start crying here? And like, you really didn't know what was going to happen next.
We're going to cringe a little bit. I mean, listen, Ric Flair's certainly not somebody who's afraid to make fun of himself a little bit. And boy, howdy, did that occur here on the Roast of Ric Flair, available right now on Fight Plus. And the beauty of Fight Plus is that it's not limited to just combat sports, Chris. What do we have in store for the 5th day of Fight
John,
Plus?
if you remember, like early on in 2020, there was so much mystery about like what was happening. And it kind of forced anyone who was creating content to really get creative with what they were airing. So enter the Moto Fight Club, one of the most unique events in the history of Fight and the history of Fight Plus. This went down May 12th, 2020 at a private track built on the land of a torn down factory in Youngstown, Ohio. It was a true tournament of champions as motocross legends across multiple generations battled bracket style in one-on-one competition. This once-in-a-lifetime event featured the likes of Nitro Circus and 4-time Rally America champion Travis Pastrana, Jeff Stanton, Kevin Windham, Damon Bradshaw, Ryan Villapoto, and nearly 60-year-old former champion Brock Glover battle head-to-head on the course featuring numerous jumps, ramps, and tight corners. This was the first motocross event to be held after the COVID lockdowns began and aimed to raise money for charity in the process.
Ryan Villapoto gets around Bradshaw, trying to find a way into the main event. Villapoto was selected as a wild card. With that wild card selection, looks like he's putting it to use, but Damon Bradshaw, there is a lot of fight left in that rider.
Man, when you hear a name like Travis Pastrana, who for all intents and purposes is an extreme sport legend, right? Like that's a name that you've heard for years. You combine him in there with a near 60-year-old in Brock Glover, who debuted in 1977, Chris.
Wow.
You talk about a unique event. This is different than just about anything you've seen before in this realm.
And unique because, I mean, the way this looked too, this was very early on in 2020 when the world was like a big question mark of like, what is happening? What's going to happen? And for these huge names to come together for something like this and for it to benefit charity, it's just such a cool event to be able to look back on now and go, wow, we were able to see that here on Fight.
Whenever I hear Youngstown, Ohio, I think of, because, you know, like I'm like Bruce Springsteen's top plus 0.1% of fans on Spotify or something. So I think he wrote a song called Youngstown, and I think about that, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. No, like, let's put a name to the face here and a face to the name. This is a torn down factory. They pave over it for motocross on the site, and you get one of the most uniquely presented events that you're ever going to find in the sport itself. With a wide array of talent spanning different generations. If this is something that you love motocross, this is legitimately a once-in-a-lifetime event. And even if you don't, well, holy moly, let's get all these legends together in one place and help you fall in love with it.
Yeah, and this felt like very like it was a secret event that was happening at the time in this, you know, very strange location. And you're right, you don't have to be a motocross fan to appreciate just how cool and unique and once in a lifetime this event was.
One of those riders pulls their helmet off. It's James Bond because it's super secret. You know, I was waiting for that. Didn't quite happen, but I can tell you it was one worth going out of the way to check out right here on Fight Plus. Again, $4.99 a month or $49.99 for the entire year. You can also try a 7-day free trial to test the waters a little bit. And I think that tells us that we should just keep trudging along here, ride along if we will in our own right, because we're halfway through the 12 days of Fight Plus, Chris. And this one showcases one of the true premium events that you can find right here on Fight. Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr. I mean, when I say those names, Chris, what comes to mind?
This, couldn't wait for us to talk about this because this was the fight of the year. And this is kind of one of those where it's like, I want to see these guys fight. Do they both still have it? Now I need to tune in to see.
Well, this show is one of the most purchased events in the history of Fight in general. And when you look at the star power, it's not hard to understand why. The Knockdown Lockdown came to us from Los Angeles, California on November 28th, 2020, stealing all the headlines from Thanksgiving weekend with a main event for the ages between two of the biggest stars in boxing history. Tyson and Jones both showed signs of their prime dominance on a show critics widely praised for its innovation and entertainment value, thanks in part to, once again, Snoop Dogg lending his voice and taking the reins on commentary. It also featured on the show is the aforementioned Jake Paul taking on former NBA slam dunk champion Nate Robinson. For one night in 2020, boxing once again captivated the entire world with two of the biggest draws in the history of the sport.
The fighters are in the ring and they are ready. So for the millions tuned in watching this live, ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
Chris, I feel like this event was one of those, do you remember where you were when you watched it kind of things?
Absolutely. And this is one of those where it's like, I just want to see what these guys can do. And they both show that they still got real power in their hands. And you mentioned Jake Paul there, and that knockout was one for the ages. The way that Nate Robinson just fell flat on his face, the commentary from Snoop Dogg there, like I think that was like the cherry on top. The event start to finish really made us feel like, hey, maybe everything in the world is kind of normal here, at least for this weekend.
I think there's a lot of people who maybe are in their young 20s, mid 20s who love combat sports. They love boxing, they love MMA, they love wrestling, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And you know that Mike Tyson is one of those names that's just so ingrained, as is Roy Jones Jr., by the way. But Mike Tyson in particular, he's almost this mythical figure, right? And if you're in your teens or your lower 20s, your mid 20s, chances are you didn't get to watch Mike Tyson in his prime. You might not have even had the chance of watching Mike Tyson compete live. So when you present people with an opportunity like this, you realize the special glossing that an event like this has over it, does it not?
And this was very much a right place, right time kind of event. And it was just like lightning in a bottle with two massive names, two legends in boxing coming together at a time when there was really not much else to do in the world. So I can't imagine a better time or a better place. This happened in Los Angeles.
Well, we've now reached Christmas here on the 12 Days of Fight Plus. And for that, we head to a place that you're fairly familiar with. Your background there, Chris Van Vliet, Hollywood, Florida.
I lived very close to where we're going right now, the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. That's where earlier this year, we saw the stars of the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship prove that they are some of the baddest competitors in the world at KnuckleMania 2. That night in February saw 9 classic matchups featuring several upsets and shocking finishes, including 2 hard-hitting championship bouts like the BKFC light heavyweight title match between Luis Palomino and Martin Brown, and the crowning of the inaugural women's flyweight championship between Christine Ferreira and Britain Hart. The world of combat sports is always looking for something new and exciting, and KnuckleMania 2 delivered big.
These two fighters are the opposite of reckless, both very tactical. Big overhand right lands from Palomino. Nothing on the lead left hook from Trey Brown. Overhand right, not there. Palomino, Chris, so elusive.
Absolutely. He takes pride in not being able to hit very often. It's like he's...
I think when it comes to bare knuckle fighting, Chris, we're seeing that natural evolution of what combat sports can be. Like, think back to the mid 90s and UFC rolls around and people are like, what is this? Like, cage fighting's not going to take off. And well, we know the behemoth that it ultimately became. In this circumstance, it almost is like a natural evolution.
So I had the founder and CEO, David Feldman of BKFC, on my podcast right before KnuckleMania 2. And he was talking about how difficult it was to make bare knuckle fighting a thing. And as soon as it got approved, man, it just took off from there. And we're able to see with events like KnuckleMania 2, just how exciting combat sports can truly be. And it like really takes it to another level here.
And you can check it all out right here on Fight and Fight Plus, just $4.99 a month, $49.99 annually. And the name KnuckleMania, obviously borrowing from the world of professional wrestling, because wrestling is everything and everything is wrestling, as we know, Chris Van Vliet. So I say we go from good times, bare knuckle fighting, to hard times, baby, for the 8th day of Fight Plus. I'm talking the NWA. NWA has been a mainstay on the Fight platform for its major shows, and the first Hard Times event was one of the biggest pay-per-views to date the company has put on. And it wasn't just an homage to the past, but also a great peek at the future of professional wrestling. This went down in Atlanta, Georgia, over on January 24th, 2020, and it saw Ricky Starks endure a gauntlet of matches to become the first NWA television champion in more than 3 decades. Starks would leverage that win into becoming one of the most talked about names in wrestling today, and it all started that night. Several Hall of Famers were also on this card, in fact, like when the Rock and Roll Express defended their tag titles against Eli Drake and James Storm, while Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner would challenge Aaron Stevens for the NWA National Championship, a show that would cement the return of one of wrestling's storied brands.
A thing of beauty and a thing of pain for Nick Aldis. This might be it. Where on earth did Nick Aldis find the wealth, the energy, the wherewithal to get out of that?
Chris, I think if you're paying any attention to professional wrestling, you know that Ricky Starks and his stock is on the rise big time right now over in AEW. This was the night that really put him on the radar, especially for people like you who were in attendance for this.
Yeah, I was there in Atlanta, January 2020, when the world was just about to shut down. We had no idea what was coming after this. And I saw this guy, Ricky Starks, backstage, and I said, there is something There's something with this guy. And then I saw him in the ring and I saw what ended up happening, him winning the television championship. And I went, yes, I can clearly see, there's so much potential for him. So it felt great being able to be there for that super special moment for him. And also just so cool to see what NWA has become. It's this perfect mix of nostalgia and also the stars of tomorrow. And they mix that together and they do it in such a great way.
I did a little Dusty Rhodes there before. Can you give
that
me
was
your
good.
best?
I like that.
Can you give me your best Dusty Rhodes?
Hard times, baby. If you have a better impression, right? Like Dusty can't be your only impression, right?
No. There's people tell me my natural speaking voice sounds like Ray Romano / Kermit.
Oh my gosh! I'll never.
Look, if you want me to talk like that, Chris, I'll talk like that the entire day. But we're not going to perpetuate that stereotype here on Fight and Focus. I assure you of that. In the 12 days of Fight Plus, you're right though. NWA it's such a throwback promotion, right? And they do a really good job, especially aesthetically, of combining yesteryear with today. And there were several names there that I mentioned. Eli Drake, James Storm, guys that are staples of pro wrestling.
And interesting to see where people were in their career, almost 3 years ago when that show aired to where they are now. I mean, Eli Drake, wrestling fans will know now as L.A. Knight.
Yeah.
One of the great innovations, John, of the pandemic era of wrestling, as we call it, was the true integration of sports and entertainment. And we can showcase that again on the 9th day of Fight Plus as we turn our attention to a new kind of combat sports here. Triller, Fight Club, Triad combat.
Give me fuel, give me fire, give me down with
The inaugural event went down at Globe Life Field in Arlington, Texas. And what better way to introduce something new than with a performance from rock legends Metallica? TFC Triad Combat aimed to introduce people to a hybrid form of fighting, aiming to level the playing field between boxers and MMA fighters in a new, unique triangular ring. There were several knockouts and fights that went the distance on this 7-bout show, with the main event featuring Frank Mir challenging two-time boxing heavyweight champion Kubrat Pulev.
Big right hand, but jab followed by the right hand by Pulev. Mir didn't like that. He's backing up. Pulev looking to tee off upon Frank Mir. Mir looking to gain his bearings. Wow.
He cannot stay away.
I actually interviewed Frank Mir after this fight.
Of course you did. Shocked. Let me tell you, I'm shocked. Now, listen, guys, you're watching one of the best interviewers and podcasters in the game right now, and Chris Van Vliet, and I'm having a blast talking about these events with you on the 12 days of Fight Plus, Chris. But I mean, come on, Metallica,
like
legitimately one of the biggest acts in the history of music.
I mean, if you really want to make a splash with something like Triad, well, just grab Metallica and say, hey,
casually, hey,
yeah,
James
you guys
Hetfield,
busy?
Come on over. You want Kirk Hammett? Yeah, come on over. We got this great event. We're doing something new. Come see how it plays out. And that is the coolest thing about it. This is something new. First off, any time that you can set yourself apart aesthetically and visually from another promotion or another company, that's huge. I mean, think back to when TNA started with the 6-sided ring, right? It set them apart because it was different. So now you have this different integration of a 3-sided ring. I've never seen anything like that before. Have you?
No, not at all. And it's one of those things that when you turn it on, you immediately go, oh, that's something different. That
that's
catches
different.
my attention. Yeah. When I was talking to Frank Mir about this, he clearly was not at 100%, as you could see with, that's knockout where he was standing up there. I still can't believe the match wasn't stopped earlier. The commentary is perfect there. It's like, what's Murgliata doing? Like, Frank Mir is clearly knocked out on his feet, and they just kind of kept that thing going.
Yeah, they did. But I do love any organization that can try to level that playing field. I think that was a very important part of what you said there, Chris, because how many of these events we keep talking about Jake Paul, right? We're like, okay, yeah, Jake Paul's in there as a boxer, but he's going against an MMA guy that doesn't have any experience in boxing. He's not trained in boxing at all. Well, now you come up with something that tries to level that out and give you these dream matchups of sorts.
And this is what really happened in the early days of UFC and the early days of MMA in the mid-90s, where it was like, what would happen if the wrestler took on the boxer? Or what would happen if the jiu-jitsu guy takes on the wrestler? And I love that with Triad, we're able to see what the answer is to those questions.
Now, I told you earlier that we would return to Nashville, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to make good on our promises here on Fight in Focus. Because for the 10th day of Fight Plus, we are gifting you Ric Flair's last match in its entirety. This was the capper on an incredible StarCast 5 weekend that was presented right here exclusively on Fight. In fact, Ric Flair's last match was the second largest and one of the most star-studded independent shows in the history of professional wrestling, featuring talent from AEW, Impact Wrestling, Ring of Honor, AAA, MLW, and elsewhere. A super show leading to the main event, which was, of course, Ric Flair's last wrestling match. As the 16-time World Heavyweight Champion teamed with his nephew Andrade El Idolo against the last outlaw himself, Jeff Jarrett, and his partner, Jay Lethal. July 31st was a special night in Nashville, one anyone in attendance or watching at home will not soon forget.
No. Come on, the greatest of all time. Do something. Andrade is there. Jay Lethal gets whacked.
So on the surface, Chris, you hear Ric Flair's last match. You might think this is just like an exhibition where it's just one match being showcased. But I think too many people sleep on how incredible the undercard for this show was.
Well, just the whole card, top to bottom, had some of the biggest names in the world of pro wrestling. And when it came down to that main event, Ric Flair does what Ric Flair does best, and he leaves it all in the ring there. And that match served up a giant slice of nostalgia for all of us. And it made people go, yep, that's why I've been a Ric Flair fan my whole life.
And it was one of those things where you really didn't know how it was going to play out. Mm-hmm. Everyone was just so curious about how is this going to look? How is it going to play out? How's Rick going to do? How is his chemistry with Andrade El Idolo going to be? And I think that from the moment you turned it on, A, it was a great crowd there in Nashville, but B, it had the whole Jim Crockett Promotions aesthetic, right? The throwback, the walls that we saw, it looked like the set of the old JCP shows. We had Tony Schiavone and David Crockett on commentary. If you crave that era of pro wrestling, 70s and the 80s, this event was for you to a T.
I think the thing that really stands out for me the most is the look on Ric Flair's face, both when he's walking to the ring and then when that match is over. You can tell just how much this meant to him. And I think he also impressed himself. Like I talked to Ric Flair just a few days before he had that match. I had him on my podcast and he was kind of unsure of like, can I pull this off? Like the biggest question is, can I pull this off? And not only did he pull it off, but he pulled it off in spectacular fashion.
No doubt about it.
Now, one of the realities, John, of the early era of the pandemic era was that most events and public gatherings couldn't be held indoors, right? So the Fight team had to innovate once more for the 11th day of Fight Plus, this time with the Rumble on the Rooftop Fight Club event. Well, this is exactly what it sounds like. A freestyle wrestling competition on an actual rooftop overlooking scenic Chicago. 8 of the best freestylers in the world challenged one another, most of them competing for the first time since the COVID outbreak had began. Traditional weight classes were thrown out the window in favor of simply pairing up wrestlers of similar sizes, creating fresh matchups like former Big Ten champion Pat Lugo versus Ohio State's Luke Pletcher in the co-main event, and a future Olympian Jordan Oliver taking on 3-time NCAA champion Jason Nolf.
JL.
He took a nice sweep in the thing. He might be.
I think there might be some condensation in that, Jim.
Yeah, I think it might be slowing down just to pick his spot here and get one good one off. And that might do it. This is definitely a chess match.
I think the biggest thing that stands out here is this is freestyle wrestling taking place on an actual rooftop with the buildings behind. Like, that's something that you'll never ever see again, I don't think.
No, and you think about it too, Chris, this is like prime lockdown. Chicago, normally a hustle and bustling city, right? There's not a whole lot going on at that time. So as you're overlooking all that, it's this weird juxtaposition in a way, but it's also a celebration of the sport. And kudos to all the people that were on this show, because when you're not actively able to train in the way that you're used to for a sport that is as rigorous and as daunting as freestyle wrestling, it is tremendously difficult. Then you take the added equation that we're throwing weight classes out the door because people can't train properly. And we're just going to give you these matchups that you're probably never going to see again on any other stage, let alone the Olympics or something akin to that. This was pretty spectacular that they pulled this off too.
And this also gives the athletes, a real chance to push themselves and to wrestle outside of their weight class and see what they're capable of against guys that maybe are a little bit bigger than them, maybe a little bit smaller than them, and pair that all together with this super unique atmosphere. And this is something that you'll definitely want to watch again.
You can do that. $4.99 a month, $49.99 for the year, 7-day free trial, even if you'd like as well. Fight Plus, we've got you covered. And on the final day of Fight Plus, the last day of Fight Plus, the Fight team gave to me and everyone, frankly, a great final gift. And for that, we take you down to Miami, Florida, just earlier this month, in fact, for Subversiv Miami Combat Jiu-Jitsu versus MMA. Innovations and new ideas have been at the forefront the last couple of years, and this is certainly no different. This is the world's biggest team grappling tournament, featuring a hybrid rule set for combat jiu-jitsu. One bracket was comprised entirely of jiu-jitsu competitors, while the other was made up of MMA fighters. The winner of each would then go on to battle one another to determine who wins the ultimate quarrel of fighting styles. The best part is, man, this is a 6-hour event with teams of 3 competing for the claim of best in the world.
It's cranks on the old school can opener.
Yeah, he forced Wagner to react back to his open guard. Made him open the guard for sure. 3:15 to go.
Freeman's a physical dude. Oh, just look at that little kick out.
Beautiful off balancing, checking the base constantly. He's pushing, pulling.
So just think about that. Once again, we're talking hybrid fight styles. This is not the first time we've discussed this here on the 12 Days of Fight Plus.
Yeah.
You have one side of a bracket versus another, 2 different fighting styles coming together to see the best of the best. It's just, I'm so impressed as we've gone through all these events, Chris. So much innovation across the board.
And look at all the sports we've talked about: professional wrestling, freestyle wrestling, MMA, boxing, motocross. And like, it's just amazing how all of this is encompassed by Fight Plus.
Yeah. And again, you can get access to this just for $4.99 a month, $49.99 annually. And you might be saying to yourself, okay, that's awesome. That's great. It was a cool 2022. I remember the last couple of years before that, lots going on. What's next?
Yeah, what's next, John?
Well, guess what? Just because the 12 Days of Fight Plus may be over, the fun does not stop, Chris Van Vliet.
It does not.
Fight and Fight Plus, in fact, have a massive 2023 ahead, including the Great Muta's final match, as we talked about earlier. Impact Wrestling's Hard to Kill pay-per-view, that's coming to you January 13th. Impact Wrestling right now, Chris, some of the best talent in the world. What do you say?
There is no question about that. There's Josh Alexander. What he's doing in there right now is not to be missed. So any chance that you can get to see him in the ring, don't miss it.
I think Speedball Mike Bailey is one of the best performers in the world as well.
So incredibly underrated for so many years in his life and his career. And now people are finally seeing what he's truly capable of.
Deanna Purrazzo is one of the best women's wrestlers in the world. Really a great roster they've got there. Check out Impact Wrestling's Hard to Kill January 13th. And on January 7th, the week prior, how about this one? Tank Davis is going to battle Hector Garcia in DC for one of the biggest bouts of 2023. We're getting that away, like right out of the way in 2023.
Wow. Way to start the year off with an absolute bang. I mean, if this is what's happening in January, what's the rest of the year going to look like?
It's an insane year that is ahead, my friend. And remember, Fight Plus is where you can follow along with all of the action. You get a special selection of premium events from more than 200 organizations, including boxing, pro wrestling, and as you saw here today, just about everything you can think of outside the box for $4.99 a month and $49.99 for an annual subscription. Or you can try the 7-day free trial to just get a taste of what Fight has to offer there. Chris, this has been an absolute blast getting to run through these last few years of offerings on Fight Plus. Where can people find you and find out more about what you're doing?
John, I am honored that you asked me to count down the 12 days here with you. So thank you so much for having me on here. If you want to check out my podcast, it's Insight with Chris Van Vliet, wherever you get your podcasts. And then just look up Chris Van Vliet on YouTube to watch all of those interviews as well.
Chris is genuinely one of the best in the industry.
You're too kind, my friend.
You will be smarter listening to that than you will be listening to me. I
don't know. I see an Emmy peeking out behind you there. I don't have any Emmys on display.
On this keywords there, on display. but this was a lot of fun, man. Thank you so much for being part of this special Fight in Focus presentation, the 12 Days of Fight, right here on Fight. We are so grateful for your support. We can't wait to see what's ahead for 2023. Have a happy holiday season and a happy new year. We'll see you next time right here on Fight in Focus.